Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Caligeris for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. Today, we've got a special treat as our guest is Amruta Moktali. Amruta has spent over a decade mastering the complex domains of data privacy and analytics and has amassed a very impressive track record spanning agile startups all the way to like tech giants like Microsoft and Salesforce. She is now the chief product officer at Skyflow, where she is harnessing her unwavering passion and deep expertise in to reimagine the way businesses protect their users' most private and sensitive data, something that absolutely affects all of us. And of course, she's not doing this alone, right? She's built a team of product people. And it's one of the things I think that you see throughout Amruta's career is just like the importance of building a really good product team. And so is here today to kind of help share her secret recipe for the perfect product team. And we are extremely excited to have you on, Amruta. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was a very great introduction. I'm very humbled, and it's wonderful to chat with you and, just talk about things I've done, learn some things, and have a great conversation.
Excellent. Excellent. We always like to learn. So first and foremost, I like to always start with like everyone's origin story. I mean, I told some of the highlights, but tell me really how you got where you are today and why you are just so passionate about product management and building the right product teams.
So product management was an accidental discovery for me. I'm an engineer by training. I graduated when times were not the best. And, I still remember, and I've told this story a few times, but I'll mention it again. It was a time when, I'm an immigrant, so visa was a big thing and the market was not great. So, jobs that were offered were being retracted. So I went into an interview with Microsoft with a great gentleman, and they give you this form to fill out saying which role do you want to apply for. And I left it empty. Because I was in this mode where nobody's giving me jobs. So I told him, I'm like, why don't you interview me and then tell me which would be the role that I would be fit for? And he's the one who picked product management for me. And he said that, you know what, I'll pick this for you. These jobs don't come that often. We may not have them. Like, great, no jobs are coming anyway.
Yeah, so right, yeah.
That was exactly right. And that was it. And I forgot about it. And like 6 months passed, and then I get this call from Microsoft saying, hey, we want you over, did the whole, interview. And it was an extremely technical role, given my background. But that was my accidental discovery into product management. But that whole process just told me that probably I was just made for it. That's what drove me, which is why he thought that I would be great at that role. And now after so many years, I can say, yes, that is my passion. And I think for me, that was it. You got in, then the ability I was lucky enough to be on a lot of V1 projects within Microsoft. So that kind of excited me a lot because I was building, I was discovering the whole time. I was not in the jazzy parts of Microsoft either. But then they became jazzy. Like the last thing I did was Bing. And, then I went on to be a part of a startup, which was kind of my first thing in a startup. I was the first product person. Then that startup went along, got acquired by Apple. Then Salesforce happened, then Clio happened, and now Skyflow happened. So I think that's kind of the journey. I did consumer stuff in Microsoft, actually. I was on the consumer side of Microsoft, and Topsy was also a little on the consumer side. Then I ventured into enterprise. So, and that's kind of most recently, I would say that's been kind of where most of it has been. And then when I went to Clio, I again went back to the consumer side. And then back to the enterprise side. So my journey's been kind of, I tell everyone it's waves. And that's been very helpful for me. And that's what I tell a lot of folks who come to me for advice sometimes is figure out your waves. And the waves could be big company, small company, different technologies, different size of companies, different markets. What that does is it grows you in different ways. How you do product management in different environments is very different. And that's kind of how it helps you build the right product, gather the right team, and learn new things. And that's really helped me out.
When I would think that you're absolutely right that it can be very different, at maturity levels, size, all of those industries and pieces and target audiences. But I think it's really smart. What you're talking about too is like you will learn different things in each of those. More of
Yes,
those can apply in the next one than may traditionally be thought of. But what a great way of seeing sort of the full spectrum of tools, approaches, and ideas that you don't get if you're just like, I do this one thing, right?
exactly. Exactly. I mean, this most simplest thing that people can relate to, right? When we do B2B products,
Mhm.
we are data driven, but sometimes we are not as data driven as a B2C product because everything is like, okay, who clicked here?
Mhm.
What's happening
Mhm.
in this
Yeah.
small button here? That's not how B2B works. But then bringing that knowledge into B2B, you start doing more experimentation. You start thinking of that. So that's kind of just bringing those pieces together.
It's a great point, right? We talk about like there's a lot that's talked about B2C and it sometimes feels like when you're on the B2B side, it must be nice to have those unlimited number of customers they have over there, right? Like you just don't have the same pieces, but we don't want to throw out those techniques completely. We're going to apply them differently. They're going to be, maybe a smaller parts, but they're still really important pieces that we can apply in there. And we see that in all areas, right? We see that with design, certainly in product management and all those pieces.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's clear from talking to you that you're a passionate mentor as well, right? And helping people and giving advice in here. And I think that probably goes to your own team. But I do think it's interesting not only to think about what your journey has been in, but how you then translate that to the type of team that you want to build and the type of team members that you try to identify. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So teams are interesting, right? The first thing you want to think about is what is this team going to do? Right? What is their goal? What is their mission? And you need to be able to understand it yourself and articulate it in the right way. And that is first and foremost, because once you know the problem you're going to solve, the
Mhm.
impact it's going to have on the customer, what you're going to build to do that, then you know the small little Lego pieces as the people you need to put together. That's the first piece. Second is I really, really emphasize diversity. And I'll tell you what I mean by diversity is diversity of thought and experience.
Mm.
So let's say, let's talk about Skyflow, right? We are doing data privacy walls. We are helping people work with sensitive information. Now, that means you apply every vertical. You have fintech,
Mm.
you have health tech, you have travel, you have e-commerce, you have every single thing. So when I'm putting together a team, I'm thinking of, okay, this is an API first product. So I need a technical person in here. I
Mhm.
need someone who understands technology, understands developers. So you need that. Then the next is you are a B2B product. You need to be able to talk to customers, understand customers' solutions. So someone with a background, maybe in solution engineering,
Mm.
working with customers, that might be an interesting perspective than traditional. Then you may have verticalized information, PMs that you may want, right? So let's say I'm going deep into fintech. Like I do need someone who can talk that language, understand things like what's 3DS, what's ISO 8583, and things like that. So I think first, the mission, what you're trying to build, and what are the different things that are important in terms of knowledge to build that is very important to know. And then as you bring in, you'll always have core values for your team because
Mhm.
every leader has a certain way they work, right? You know that.
Yep.
And making sure that, people fit in that culture, you're going to trying to build what type of communication is important. But I think the key is that building blocks that you need. And the initial few people are very critical.
Mm.
Um, like the first one or two hires are extremely important. And most importantly, you want to think of the seniority of the hire. Because sometimes what happens is if you hire someone extremely senior and that's the first person in your team, you're not going to get much out of them. If they're, you needs, or it could be senior, but you want to make sure the person is a player coach.
Mm.
That is going to be extremely important, whether you're in a large company, small company, anything. If you're building a team from scratch, make sure that first hire is extremely critical. And then if it is a senior person, there's this domino effect I keep talking about, right? So I love this book, The One Thing. And what they talk about there is figure out that one thing that is going to help you capture everything else. And it be this one person that is your anchor and then lets you figure out, okay, what are the other type of people I need to hire around that person to fill the gaps? Or if this person is smart and senior enough, you can let them hire
Mm-hmm.
other people. So I think that's the initial dynamic I would think about when I'm building a new team.
It's really interesting too, because I think you could make an argument for a senior player coach. You can make an argument for a different type of piece, but it's doing with intention and knowing what you're getting, because that is going to affect everything else. And it's not just, I would imagine, affecting your team, but it affects the reputation of your team with the rest of the organization and their expectations, right? Like,
Totally.
they're going to be setting the mood that everyone else comes in with for all those partners. And that also makes a difference of if I set it really high or I set it really low in level of expertise, then my partner's expectations for everyone else will be very different.
Exactly. And that is extremely important. And the other thing is, when I talk about diversity, it's like diversity of thought and experience. I think that is extremely important, especially in a B2B world. Because most of the time in the B2B world, you're building things and this gets into some of the things we're talking about later, is around how do you build something that is not an everyday thing for you? And that's when different perspectives matter, different point of views matter. So, for example, in my previous team, I had someone who came into product. I pulled them into product management from marketing, someone from solutioning, someone who was an engineer, someone who was a traditional product person, someone who came in from sales, actually. So those are the kind of mixes that really help, because the point of view they would bring, because we would talk about something truly technical and the person who came in from marketing, they'd be like, your buyer's not going to understand this.
Right.
Like, what are you guys talking about? Like, just you can't do this. Like, you guys are it's funny, right? But even me, sometimes I sometimes don't get it. And today also there's my team and like, what are you talking about? This doesn't make sense. I'm like, yeah, tell me more. Why doesn't it make sense to you? Like, I want to know why. And I think that mix is very important. And when you're also building a team, I keep talking about this thing as to it's an orchestra, right? There are different instruments. You have to have harmony. You're going to create new music. Some's going to work, some is not going to work. But I think it's important to make sure that the next person you're hiring works well with the people who are already there. Not someone you want, but someone that we want. Otherwise, they may be an A player, they might be awesome, but if they cannot work well with the rest, they're going to bring down your team. And I think that's a very nuanced thing that you want to make sure that's there.
And how do you do that? Right? Do you have teams interview each other or the future places or help write the job descriptions? Tell me some of the ways that you do that.
So one of the first things is create a list of jobs to be done for the new person. Most of the time, what I have observed is the synchrony between the teams gets disrupted when the other people in the team don't know why you hired this person, what their role is going to be. Oh, that person's stepping on my toes. Why is this person doing? You want to take care of that even before you start the hiring process. The second thing is transparency. Is once you have that, let's say you're interviewing a bunch of people, you have 3 people in the final round. Have transparency. Hey, folks, these 3 people I'm interviewing. I know I would love everyone to talk to them, but it's not possible. It's not a great interview experience. So I'm just going to pick a few of you to talk to them. So that transparency really helps. Third is making sure the interview notes are available to folks if they want to go in and see how the evaluation was done, because every single person puts notes. So now you're creating a flow where every person knows why this person was hired, who we are looking to hire, who interviewed them, and who thought what about the person. So as the person's coming in, everything's kind of put together. And then even before you give the offer, you say, hey, I'm thinking about this person. This is why I'm thinking about this person. And another thing that I've done in the past is as soon as someone has accepted a job, I make my whole team send them a note even before they've joined the team. So it just starts creating this nice, friendly rhythm.
Yeah.
And those are some tricks I would say really help.
No, and I think that's great too, because I do think often the tension comes from what is this person doing and what does that mean for my role? Like it just is, right? So being really clear about the jobs to be done before there's a candidate on the player. And it can be hard because it seems so obvious to you. Like you see the whole, that's why you're hiring for it. You're like, I see the whole. Surely everyone else can understand this. And no, they don't necessarily, right? So being really explicit about that. I also really like both yes, not everybody can interview everybody, but being clear about that and then showing the notes and not just your notes, but their peers' notes. Again, huge level of transparency and also confidence. There is confidence when someone's coming on board and you can see that you and your peers were excited for these reasons. Like the benefit of a doubt makes a difference. That it is the pre-impression, not even a first impression, but it really changes how you approach that situation. And that can be the difference between, a quick success and either a failure or something that just takes a lot longer to kind of meld.
And you're setting up everyone for success, the person coming in and the team that's going to absorb them. So that's critical.
Yeah. And I can see when you talk about the different diversities of thoughts and experiences is also really important. But that is something that can be hard for newer managers, right? It is often easier to manage people like ourselves. We understand what makes them tick. We speak the same language, right? But there's a danger in that, right? Of if you all know the same thing, then you assume everyone knows it. But it does mean that you have to be more intentional in communication. And I know that is a really big sort of tenet of your pieces. So talk about how you build strong communication amongst the team as well as with yourself and the team.
I think communication is key, especially now in the remote world. It's extremely key. And I'll be honest, I am not perfect. There's so much I myself have to work on because I am someone who's great with in-person and verbal communication versus written communication, right? And everyone has different things that they are good at. The key is to figure that out and leverage that. So I'll give you my own example. Because I'm better on verbal versus written, I pick up the phone and talk to people. I'll do a quick Zoom call. I will, quickly text people. I've started leaving voice notes to folks. And, but that is critical. And the way I am trying to do it within the team and pushing everyone to do it is public channels, because Slack is huge nowadays everywhere, or Teams or whatever you're using. No side conversations. That is where the communication breaks down. And nobody does it intentionally. It just happens and we forget about it. So the biggest thing is public communication of everything. No short sentences, if possible. Give some context, because everyone who's reading this may not have the context of where you're coming from. So I think those things have really helped us actually internally with just like our burst of communication, right? Then there is a larger space around, when you're running a team, what are we working on? The planning, what are we trying to do? Communicating the changes, and most importantly, why some changes are happening, because you are going to be a conduit with the engineering. Maybe it's a small team. They were like, hey, we figured all these different bugs. So we were planning to do these 10 things. Now this can't happen. We can only do 5. Communicate that, and in a way where other people are like, okay, here are the dependencies. So there's a little bit of that. The other big piece of communication is outside of your team. And that is extremely critical because the language change has to happen. The level of detail that you're talking about internally to the team is very different when you talk externally. And that is a big shift, I think. I have learned a lot through the years. If I talk about, oh, we shipped an API that does this and this, I'm like, yeah, sure. So the sales and marketing team will be like, so what?
What does that mean?
So then you want to change that and say, customers can now do X, Y, Z. So that is the communication difference that is extremely important for PMs, especially B2B products, because there is every product manager in the B2B product world interacts a lot more with the commercial organization. And that's where we are the conduit as to between R&D and the commercial. So we are the translation engine, as I call it. And we have to make sure that that's there. So those are kind of the 3 pieces, I think, of communication: small bursts internally within teams, across teams, kind of what's going on, and across the company.
What are so I think you make a great point too about the level of detail and context different internally versus externally.
Yeah.
And I also, just as a note, the voice memo is becoming one of my favorite things, particularly like when you're giving context. I'm a very passionate speaker about things. So like, let me just record some context here. Like, let me tell you the story, and then we all have that story. And then we can like share it and readdress ourselves. And it is, I think to your point, it is very clear different people prefer different communication styles. Some people communicate much better if they can do it asynchronously. People on the show hear me talk about this all the time. I love to brainstorm. You could just throw me in a room and like throw a topic at me and I'll be like, oh, this is fun. And I have team members that like this shuts them down completely. And they're like, this is the worst thing ever, Rebecca. Why do you hate us? And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But so it's all of that that's really important. And I do think that when we demonstrate that we understand different people's communication styles, it helps our teams also recognize that there are different communication styles. Everybody has a tendency to think theirs is the best, by the way, just like that's, yeah.
Of course.
Right. They're like, mine's the best, but I'll do it for you your way. But
yeah.
So, getting the right team. We talked about diversity of thought and experience. I know from your own background that you are open and willing to see what is sometimes the right DNA or clay, not necessarily just the right experience. And when we think about it that way, and you go back to your Microsoft interview too, and like what traits are there that not necessarily experience related, but what traits is it that you really look for in team members?
For me, the biggest thing is curiosity.
Absolutely.
Is this person curious? Because I think, especially as a product person, you have to be curious about technology, about people, about customers, about how things are being solved. That is extremely critical for me when I'm looking for what I call the X factor or the spark in someone. Is this person curious? Second, for me, is point of view. You need to have a strong, it may be wrong, it may be something completely different, but having a point of view tells me that you think of something, you have the ability to stay strong or debate with anyone about this is my point of view and this is why I think like this, which means, you're not going to go in a room and just be a yes person, right?
Okay.
Like,
Yep.
yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. We'll do this. Oh, sure. We'll do this versus why? Like, I think it should be done like this and this is why.
Right.
So those are kind of the two non-technical anything. The third thing I look for is, I think it kind of goes hand in hand with curiosity, is also the ability to grasp new things. So sometimes, a lot of times in an interview, I'll ask someone a completely different question, not related to anything they have worked on or any technology they've worked on, just to see how they react, how they think of it. And, have they gone and like talked about something in their experience? Oh, I was dropped into this and this is kind of how I brought up. Because as a product person, that's your life. You are going to have to learn new things. And while, verticalized expertise is important, even within that, you need to be able to learn new things. And then I usually say three things, but here I'll say one more, is empathy. I think that's just having that empathy versus I know everything. That's extremely important.
And I think it's such a nice counterbalance, because I totally get what you're saying with the point of view. I need someone who can articulate a point of view and why and hold to it. I don't want someone who's wishy-washy, but I need someone who is curious enough to learn new things and empathetic to also realize that I will have a strong reasoning, but I'm not a bulldozer here either. I'm like, oh, wait, if you can show me something else, like I'm in, right? I'm going to tell you why I think this and I mean it really strongly and I'm passionate, but I'm open. And I think empathy is one way that we really see that that kind of trait coming through.
Yeah, I think that's just going to help you. I know the word empathy gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah,
everyone talks about empathy, but it's multiple different things. It's not just empathy. The most common thing is empathy with your customer, with your end user, which is critical. But I think there's empathy even with the people you work with.
Yeah,
and that's what makes a good team.
I think it's what makes a good team. I also think it's what often makes us good partners with our internal teams, right? Like empathy. Like understanding everybody's different. So we're going to use what our sort of archetypes here, but like there is a different personality that is generally associated with sales or generally associated with development. Again, bunch of nuances in here, but like it's true. And if you don't understand that, then your ability to work with them, to understand what they need, to see their perspective, it's going to not make you as strong a partner internally either.
Totally. I mean, I'm sure every single person has this thing where someone has a conversation. I don't know what that person does. I don't know what they do all day. Like that's always something that I've seen. I'm like, well, then go ask.
Right.
Or figure it out.
That's a great way to figure out. Yeah. So building the right team is one piece of it, right? But once you have a great team, right? And I've had a great teams, like the one you also want to keep that great team, right? You worked really hard to build a great team. Let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that you keep the team happy, motivated, dedicated here with you.
No, it's very important. Hiring is so difficult that you don't want to lose the right folks. One thing you want to make sure you reiterate is have a pulse to make sure the passion of what you're building and why these people joined still exists. Right? Because there are times when there will be folks who will lose the trust and, lose like the thing. And that's when you want to either bring them back, or if you're not able to bring them back, it is a hard decision to let them go too, because it may not be the right thing for the rest of them. And one of the key pieces to keep a team together is trust. You have to build that trust. You with your team, the team amongst each other. That needs to be there. If I hand you something, I trust you, you'll get it done. Or I'll trust you'll ask for help if you can't get it done.
Yep.
I think that's important. The other is this model that I use with everyone I've hired or have had my team, which was given to me by a very dear, previous boss called Heart Tree Star. So with everyone, there is heart. Figure out what they love to do. Tree, how they love to grow. And star, how they like to be rewarded. And as a team lead, if you kind of have those three, because for every individual, it might be different. Now you know how to, how to push them, how to encourage them. And then they will come back to you, I'm not really loving what I'm doing. I'm kind of bored. So you know that, this person's extremely technical. You need to throw more technical challenges as this person, versus someone else would be like, I'm bored. This person's very commercial thinking. So I need to throw them there. So knowing that helps. So the passion that they have in the team, the trust, and just knowing each individual, what drives them, is going to help you keep that team together. And of course, everyone does this, but a lot of time people don't do it sincerely, is feedback. Do a 360 at any periods of time, right? Do a 360 and send that raw 360 to your folks, like anonymize it, but send that. That's extremely helpful. And encourage them to go talk to people about it, because that's how people grow. And that's what people are here for in your team, is to grow in their career. And that's the best way you can help them, is getting that 360 feedback.
Yeah. I think the trust is key. And I think you put it well. It's that a huge, there is such a relief and a strength when you know that your teammates are doing their best and will do what they said to do, or will raise their hand, right? I don't have to worry about that. I can just move on with my stuff. And that's, I think, one of the best things. And I would also, and I know you do this, right? You continue that level of transparency that you had in the hiring process.
Yeah.
Within the team. That's another place, again, where helps people feel trust and peace. And I also think the individual motivations, what benefits one is not the same as what gets one another way excited, right? Some people love just say I'm doing a good job and that's it. You don't have to do anything else. I'm like, please don't ever mention me in public. Right?
Yes. It's so true, right? Everyone thinks that everyone wants accolades, and they're like, no, this person does not. Just keep giving me important work. I don't tell me my name out there.
Yeah, please don't mention me ever.
It's funny what you figure out when you actually ask people.
Yeah. Yes. And you watch them, and it's very, very true. The other thing, and this is something I know you've talked about in some of your other areas, is I think motivating the team. We all get excited Okay, let me rephrase that. It can seem easier to get excited when you're working on a product that's for you, right? Like if there was, a product for people in Maine who just got a new dog, whatever, I'd be like, I could product manage the heck out of this, right? But that is not the truth for most of us, right? We still can find passion in it, but there is some different levels of that when it is not like, oh, this is not the product I love by itself. How do you help that?
I think it's stories.
Mm.
So one of the things, so for example, Skyflow is a great example, right? We are doing a data privacy walk, which is an extremely technical platform API. If I'm going to bring someone who's like, what am I doing? Who's going to use it? It's a CTO. I'm not an engineer. You know, if I start talking about it in the way that, oh, I'm going to help protect PII and do this, it may not relate to people. Now, the first thing is you want to truly understand the problem you're trying to solve and the impact your solution is going to have on the person. A lot of times I've found extreme success in humanizing it.
Mm.
So, for example, right, there's so many data breaches happen. What's a data breach? Right. So I'll be like, oh, you know what? You go to Vegas, you played in a casino. You know that casino was MGM. They had a data breach. You gave them your SSN, you gave them your passport. That was stolen because all the PII was gone. Now they relate.
Yeah.
And then they're like, you know what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to protect that. I'm trying to make sure that that doesn't happen again. That, when you give information in a doctor's office, you're signing a form which tells you that, oh my God, your health information, your address, your phone number and stuff will be shared. I am making sure that it gets done the way you want it to be done. And that is the story you want to say.
Yeah.
Bring that story and humanize it. Everyone can find a similar story. And so I'll give you an example, right? So when I was at Salesforce, initially I'm building out AI and products for sales leaders, right? I'm not a sales leader. How do I know? And that is where, sometimes you have the luxury, which I did then, to go follow a sales leader, try it out, get feedback, the typical things, everyone's doing. But when you don't, you then when I would talk to my mom or my sister, like, what are you, like, you humanize it for them. You're like, hey, you know what? You went to the grocery store. There's a manager there. Now that person needs to track what was sold in his grocery store and who bought what on which discount. Like, that's what I built for him, is like a table. So the person can figure out, okay, chips sold at this much. And this is the chip that was the most popular one. So I'm going to store that more. So always humanizing it helps that. The second is the impact. Don't forget the impact. Impact is on the people and on the business and what impact you're going to have when you're trying to build this. And that is extremely important because without that, whatever you build is, you're not going to be able to relate to folks. So when you're thinking of something that's not yours, figure out the story and the connection to something and the impact it's going to have. When you have your own story, it becomes very exciting and you can talk about it to everyone in like this energized way because you know it. You're saying your story and not someone else's story. And I think that's important.
Well, and I think it's also, you're talking about the personas, the problems they're solving, and the impact. Like, those are things that not only they're going to motivate you. Everybody wants to have an impact, but there are things that can, as you said, motivate others, right? It can motivate others in the organization as you're working on a project and you're trying to get people around. It can motivate potential customers when you tell them these things in this way. So those stories are powerful for your own motivation and for others. And I would think too, like if I was going to interview at a company, I would want to hear that story, right?
Yeah.
Because while I might still make it my own there, I want a company that has that kind of vision and passion. We've all been there. Like some people are just really passionate about the worms they grow for the soil, right? And you're like, okay, but when they tell you, you're like, suddenly I'm super passionate about worms for soil. Who knew? And that's the kind of place I want to work because that passion can become my passion. And that's, to your point, is what keeps us focused on it and makes a product that we would personally use a product that we are passionate about and really love.
Yeah. And I think why you're here. Like,
Yeah.
I think everyone needs to answer that question. And everyone asks me, like, why are you here? And like, I lived the problem, saw the problem. This is what I want to solve. I think the whys are very important.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We talked about lots of different things today. If you were going to have listeners do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would that be?
One thing I would say is, and everyone doesn't do this really well, what is your why?
Mm.
Why are you doing what you're doing? And why do you want to continue to do what you're doing? Figure out the why.
Mm.
And the other thing is, if you have teams, go figure out what drives every single person in the team and make sure, you are addressing their needs. I think those are extremely important things. And not a lot of folks do it, unfortunately.
I like it.
We're just running too fast.
Right. Understand your own why and make sure you understand the why of your team member so you can help fill that. It's great.
Yeah.
All right. If people want to learn more about you or your thinkings and you have some great experience to bring to the table, where should they go? Where would you send them?
Ping me on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I am on Twitter at Amruta M, or, drop me a note on, LinkedIn or amruta@skyflow.com.
Excellent. Amruta, it was a genuine pleasure having you on today. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and insights.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It was wonderful.
All right. That does it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.